Going on, Lions fans? Welcome to the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel, your go-to location for all things Lions related. That includes updates, news, analysis, and so much more over here on the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel. If this is your first time ever coming to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Trust me, you are not going to want to miss any of the content that we are currently putting out this season about your Detroit Lions. Now, today, we are doing our typical Scout the Opponent video, but obviously, as you guys can see, I am solo this week, just due to some technical difficulties. And so don't worry, we're going to be back next week. He'll definitely be here on Monday to be able to, recap the Houston Texans game as well as do our film study for next week. But for today, you guys got me, and it's all good because, like I said, we are going to go over the Lions and Texans matchup, go over what is going to make this another tough test for the Lions. Clearly, they are riding high right now, currently sitting at 7-1 in the NFL, which is good enough for second best record in the entire NFL, the best record in the NFC. And currently, Morgan and I have talked about it. This looks like the best team in the NFL, period, based off of how they've been playing both on the offensive end and even on the defensive end, despite not having Aiden Hutchinson. Now, we know that when it comes down to the defensive end, they did just recently acquire Zadarius Smith, which Morgan and I went over in detail in our last video. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely go look at that after we go through this video and go through the film and talk about what makes the Texans a tough matchup. Currently, the Texans are coming off of a loss to the New York Jets last week on Thursday Night Football, and it was a tightly contested game, considering the fact that obviously the Jets have had a number of really difficult weeks, obviously firing Robert Saleh and really just trying to figure out things on the offensive end, even after acquiring Devontae Adams. But they finally got on the right end of things with going up against the Texans last week. And the Texans have had their struggles. Like I said, they're currently sitting at 6-3. And this is a team that clearly is the front runner in the AFC South. And it is, when you look at this team, when they are healthy, when they are firing on all cylinders, they look the part of a playoff contending team. And it's a team that, if things were going right, it wouldn't be, crazy to think that this is a team that could push for a conference championship type of game. But currently they're dealing with a number of things when it comes to this roster. One of those things primarily being injury. Their injury report came out today, and there are already some big names that are going to be out. Will Anderson, their premier pass rusher, is not going to be playing this week, as well as Damian Pierce, who is their backup running back, will also not be available this week. Nico Collins is currently questionable, coming back from a hamstring injury, hasn't practiced much at all this week. They did get him out there today, but it was in a very limited fashion. So there's still some questions on whether or not Nico Collins will play come Sunday night. And then Tank Dell is another one of their big time wide receivers that is also limited for most of this week, didn't practice for most of this week, but was limited today. But there still seems to be a little bit more optimism that he would play come Sunday night. So injury right now is the biggest thing that is really hampering the Houston Texans, especially when you start talking about, like I said, we went over some of their skill positions with Nico Collins and Tank Dell, but they're also having a number of injuries with their offensive line, and that has caused a lot of issues for CJ Stroud, who, when you look at his numbers, aren't terrible, right? He's thrown for over 2,000 yards already. He has 11 touchdowns thrown. He has only 4 interceptions. But where things start to get very that's not good, is when you look at how often he's been sacked 30 times so far this season. And it's just that's not what you want for a young quarterback like Stroud. And it's not like he's a statue back there. CJ Stroud is much more mobile than I think a lot of people gave him credit for when he first came into the league. Obviously, he's not your Lamar Jackson. He's not your Josh Allen or things like that. But CJ will use his legs when necessary. And it's a big part of what makes him a talented quarterback, a young talented quarterback, someone that, wouldn't surprise me that in a couple years, if he continues to develop and continues on the trajectory he's in, he will be in those types of MVP conversations because he's just that talented. And I think that's where, if you're the Detroit Lions and you're Aaron Glenn and you're this defense, that's where you start, right? It all becomes about, okay, he's been sacked a ton of times. This offensive line has sustained injuries. They have a number of different players out with backups or even third string players and playing in the interior of this offensive line. How can we get after him then in a similar fashion as the Jets did last week and make this a much, more muddied up game for both CJ Stroud and Joe Mixon, who has been having a fantastic season as of lately, even after, not being re-signed by the Bengals and now moving on to the Texans. So like I said, when you start to go to the offense of the Texans, there's a number of names on it that are still very much, like I said, dangerous. You talk about CJ Stroud, you talk about Joe Mixon, Dalton Schultz is a tight end that I think, again, sometimes gets overlooked, but again, has been playing really well. They've got Robert Woods, who's a very savvy veteran for them. So there's a number of things that the Lions still have to contend with this offense. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the tape. This first play that we're going to look at, I think, really highlights what I was saying earlier about CJ Stroud being much more mobile than people really give him credit for. You're going to see this play kind of break down a little bit. It's going to kind of part up the middle. He's going to move up and make this amazing throw to Tank Dell, who comes, crossing over the middle. And these are the types of things where if you're the Lions, you got to have much better gap integrity. You got to be stickier in coverage on the back end, not allowing someone like Tank Dell to go and just get this wide open, getting that type of matchup. And, this is a good opportunity for someone like, Kerry Joseph or Brian Branch to be playing a much better job at playing that center field safety and being able to take these types of throws away. Because again, CJ's mobile enough where he can extend these plays. He can allow these deeper routes to develop and eventually hit his man once they get open. So really going to be interested in seeing, again, how the Lions choose to contain CJ Stroud, because you just can't allow stuff like this to happen. You can't be giving up these types of big plays, because the Texans offense is one that, again, even though it's missing some pieces, like I said, might not have Nico Collins. Stephon Diggs is already out for the season. Obviously down a running back. Like, they still have the offensive prowess and playmakers to be able to take advantage of you if you're not careful. Now, moving on to the second play for this film study, we're once again going to be highlighting Tank Dell. And I think Tank Dell becomes the number one priority when it comes down to these wide receivers on the outside. Because like I said, even though he hasn't practiced much this week, all signs are still pointing to him more than likely playing. And he was, like CJ Stroud's, one of his favorite targets last year. And I think he's starting to come on again with Nico Collins being out, with Stephon Diggs now being out of the lineup. He's starting to get a much larger share of the targets. And it's for good reason. He is such a matchup nightmare because they can line him up just about anywhere, whether it's on the inside, the outside. He can just find ways of getting open. And here we're seeing him have a little bit of a switch release with the other receiver. And again, the corner has a really difficult time sticking with Tank Dell as he's, crossing the field onto this bit of a drag route. And these are the types of things that the Lions have to be much better in communication. When you get caught up in these types of routes, in terms of like crossing routes, the outside corner, and whether it's a nickel or a linebacker, have to be much more in tune with, hey, what are you going to do when a player comes across your face like this? Because essentially, as Tank Dell is making this crossing route, the middle linebacker more than likely has his eyes on CJ Stroud, but he never picks up the fact that Tank Dell is coming into his vision. There's also another receiver that's crossing on the other side of him. And because there's not any clear communication of like, hey, what happens when this crossing route happens? The nickel here has to basically go underneath the linebacker just to try and keep up with Tank Dell. And so fortunately, he's a good enough athlete to catch him screeching down the sideline. But again, these are things that the Lions have to be much better at. And they have been in most cases in terms of being able to communicate, being able to pass things off. When you start talking about Jack Campbell and Alex Anzalone, great sideline-to-sideline linebackers. So, if you're Aaron Glenn, these are things that you're showing up on tape, and you're just like, hey, when we have these types of things, there has to be clear communication of who's going to pick up the crosser so that we don't have guys running wide open across the middle of the field. Now, Tank Dell and CJ Stroud are not the only thing that the Lions are going to have to contend with this Sunday. They also have to deal with Joe Mixon. And I think Joe Mixon has been having a fantastic season. You look at his stat line, 609 yards, rushing 6 touchdowns, 21 first downs, on the ground. Like, he has been having a very, very good year after leaving the Cincinnati Bengals. And this was one of those random moves that I didn't quite understand for the Bengals perspective, because while Joe Mixon probably did have some injury concerns, when he was healthy, he was a very big contributor for them. It's very similar, in my opinion, to Dallas choosing to allow Tony Pollard to walk. And Dallas has definitely had a much more difficult time finding production out of the running back position than the Bengals have. But still, you have players like Pollard and Joe Mixon. And when you see them, performing on Sunday, you can see why they are still performing at such a high level. And that's very much the case with Joe Mixon. And it's not something I'm incredibly worried about with the Lions, because they've done such an amazing job in defending the run in the first place. But again, even though this is a makeshift offensive line, sometimes it can just be play calling. And in terms of being a defensive tackle or defensive end, you have to be able to still generate penetration. You still have to be able to have good gap integrity, because when they do stuff like this, where the entire offensive line is blocking to the right, and you're, as a defensive tackle, just getting washed down the line, you open up these great lanes for Joe Mixon to be able to run through, be able to have cutback lanes. And while this isn't a house call by any means, like, these are the types of drives that start to keep, that can keep a drive alive, and again, start to give an offense momentum. So it's something that the Lions are going to have to be very much in tune with. Again, continuing to do what they've done for most of the season, which is, hey, play the run really well. Obviously, last week against Josh Jacobs, they got off to a fairly slow start. Josh Jacobs basically had 100 yards rushing, or close to 100 yards rushing, in the first half. But again, great adjustments by Aaron Glenn in the second half. I think, if I remember correctly, Josh Jacobs only finished with 95 yards rushing. But again, Joe Mixon is that type of threat. And he's not just a threat in the running game, he's also a threat in the passing game. So after CJ Stroud, and make sure that they're containing him in the pocket, being able to get to him quickly with pressure, they still have to be mindful of the fact that the Texans do have a very, very dangerous running back in the backfield in the form of Joe Mixon. Now, we spent a good amount of time talking about the offense of the Texans, and for good reason. Like I said, they have some pretty big names that are getting a lot of notoriety in the league, in CJ Stroud, Joe Mixon, and Tank Dell. But there's still that defensive side of the football. And whenever you have a defense that's coached by DeMeco Ryans, like, it's a unit that you have to be mindful of. Even with them missing Will Anderson this weekend, the Texans still have Danielle Hunter, and Lions fans should be very, very familiar with Danielle Hunter and the type of damage he can do on a defense. But currently, the Texans defense is actually playing pretty well. They're about third in the league in terms of pass defense, in terms of yards given up, and they're about 12th when it comes down to rushing yards given up. So again, not the greatest defense, but they are much more competitive than I think people are giving them credit for. And so it's something that, with the Lions offense that has been very, very good and performing at a high level, they still may find their challenges. And I think that all starts with someone like Danielle Hunter, that, like I said, the Lions are very, very familiar with. But Danielle Hunter still has that pop in his game. He still has that quickness, that athleticism, to be able to just make your defensive tackles look silly. And this is him doing that to Darnell Wright of the Chicago Bears. And Darnell Wright is a tackle that I am actually very high on. Even though he plays for the Bears, he's someone that I think is going to develop into a really, really good right tackle. Now, Danielle Hunter is going to be going against Penei Sewell next week, or this Sunday, I'm sorry. And so there's, I expect this to be a very good battle between the two of them. But there's also the possibility that Penei might get moved over to the left side, seeing as Taylor Decker had, popped up on the injury report yesterday with a shoulder issue and didn't practice today. So if there's a situation where you end up having a backup right tackle, this is something that, again, that the Lions are going to have to figure out, okay, how do we deal with someone like Danielle Hunter? Do we leave a tight end, and do we leave a running back in to basically give Jared Goff that extra protection? Because the last thing you want to do is give a pass rusher like this, free reign to basically rush your quarterback. And they've been playing fairly well on the back end as well. I really like Jalen Petre. I think they have a lot of really good talent in that secondary. So again, Jared Goff is going to have to be able to play fast. He's going to have to be able to play smart. And, again, these corners are young, but they will challenge. And that's going to be something that the Lions are going to have to figure out what they're going to, the solution to being able to attack this defense in the best way possible. It wouldn't surprise me if this once again turns into one of those uglier games where it's going to be led, the charge is going to essentially be led by David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs starting on the ground, and then allowing the pass game to open up. With the Lions getting Jameson Williams back this week, there's definitely going to be like your fair shot of big plays that they're going to be trying. But again, this is a defense that I think DeMeco Ryans is going to have them prepared, and he's going to be having them play at a high level. Even with them missing Will Anderson, you still can't discount the rest of this defensive line. So overall, I do think the Lions are going to have another tough test on their hands. As anytime you're on a win streak like this, you know that you're going to get every team in the NFL's best shot. And I think that's very much what you're going to get in the Texans. They are very much a highly competitive team. They are very much driven to, again, get into the postseason themselves. And after them coming off a loss to the Jets, you can expect them to be coming in on Sunday night, looking to get back on the winning side of things. The Lions have to basically be locked in like they have been all season, continue to do the little things that have helped them to have the 6-game win streak, and just go into Houston and do the things that are necessary. Take advantage of the areas where the Texans are weak, which is that interior offensive line. And it is the lack of skill players on the outside. Like, you will Aaron Glenn will definitely have more opportunities to get after CJ Stroud. But again, in doing that, if you're going to choose to blitz more, you're going to have to make sure that your linebackers and your secondary players that are blitzing can still be disciplined in their rush. And if they can do that, if they can, again, speed up CJ Stroud's clock, continue to get him to work off rhythm, then that gives the Lions a much better chance of being able to quiet down that offense that does still have the ability to make big plays. And in terms of defense, it's going to be about, again, just making sure that you're taking advantage of the things that this defense gives you, not feeling like you have to, try and get big chunk plays, continuing to do the things, once again, that has allowed them to have this great win streak. Trust the run game, continue to test them on the ground. And when things start to soften up, take your shots in the passing game. I think Amon-Ra will have another big game this week. I do expect them to get Jameson Williams involved pretty heavily now that he's back from suspension. And I think with all of those things combined, I think the Lions come out on top in this one somewhat fairly easily. I believe I picked the score of 30-17 going in favor of the Lions. I do think their win streak continues, but I will absolutely say this is not a team, despite the score that I picked, that I'm necessarily overlooking, because I do like DeMeco Ryans as a head coach. I do like CJ Stroud as a quarterback. And these are the types of teams that can just be hungry enough and they start executing. If the Lions are sloppy in their execution, they could find themselves on the losing end in this primetime game. So with that said, guys, that's going to do it for this week's scouting video. Let me know in the comment section, was there anything that also stood out to you in some of the clips that we broke down? Is there something that I didn't talk about that you're like, hey, the Lions also have to contend with this when talking about, CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans? Let me know all that in the comment section below. Also, if you are looking for any more additional Lions coverage, all you have to do is head over to prideofdetroit.com. There are brand new articles being uploaded over there every single day and all the way up to Sunday. So again, make sure you're checking out the website and staying up to date on all of the latest news and updates regarding the Detroit Lions. But with all that said, I'm Miko. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and we'll be sure to catch you guys in the next one.